So it's a great honor to receive this degree from the University of Western Ontario. My field is economics, and Western has for many years had an outstanding group of economists, many of whom I've known. So it's also, for me, a really special pleasure to receive an honor like this here. So let me start by echoing your Chancellor's words and congratulating all the new graduates here receiving degrees. You've worked hard, and it's a wonderful accomplishment. The opportunity to address all of you, both the new graduates and their families and friends, reminded me that I received my own bachelor's degree exactly 40 years ago. Much has happened during those 4 decades, and I want to take this occasion to reflect on some of those changes. I mean, just a few. There have been so many. Most of you graduating today were not even around in 1972. And you probably don't realize, unless your grandparents have told you, how close that era was to, the extinction of the dinosaurs and the invention of fire. But I'm sure some of the parents and grandparents here will remember a little better some of the experiences that I'm going to describe. And I would indeed call them revolutions, because they've been big changes. So I'm going to look at 2. The first is social, and that's the increase in the opportunities for women to enter all sorts of fields from which they'd been mostly excluded in earlier generations. And the second is technical, and that's just how the computer and other digital devices have changed the way economists do their work. So for me personally, one of the most dramatic changes since 1972 is the increase in the number of women in economics. Now, I'll talk about economics because that's what I know firsthand, but the patterns and trends that I'm going to describe are similar in other academic fields, especially, I would say, the sciences and the professions. So when I was an undergraduate, but even by the time I was taking advanced courses, I was very often the only woman in the class. And the larger lecture courses had a moderate sprinkling of women, but in a couple of small advanced classes, I was the only one. And in graduate school, the absence of women was, even more pronounced. So today in economics, women are still in the minority, but now we're a substantial minority, not a tiny group. And our numbers continue to grow. So I looked up the numbers. The fraction of women entering the fraction of women among entering PhD students now is about 1/3, and it's held steady at that level for the last 15 years. So if you look at the share of women higher up the rungs on the academic ladder, the numbers shrink, but that's just because there weren't so many women entering the pipeline 40 years ago. So I would expect in another couple of decades, the share of women, if the current trends continue, it's going to be about 1/3 at every level. So is it ever going to be a half? Nothing in the current numbers suggests that it ever will be. Is that something to worry about? I guess I don't think it's really a cause for concern. I think there are many reasons women may find certain fields of study or certain professions more or less attractive, relative to how men view the same fields. I mean, and there are a number of reasons for this. I mean, one that I think, has to be key is that women still have, and I think will always have, a unique role in child rearing, and that by itself has to have a substantial impact. A woman who anticipates having children is more likely to anticipate wanting to take some time off from her job, either by leaving market work altogether for a period of years or by working part-time for some years. And it's not equally easy to manage that in all professions or in academia in all fields. So in economics, in the natural sciences, in computer science, things move so rapidly. Someone who took 5 years off from work, when re-entering, it would be almost like starting over. So I think many women will decide, deliberately and sensibly to choose other fields where the decay in what you've learned is not quite so rapid if you take a few years off to raise children. So women will may tend to choose other, choose different professions in different numbers for men. So I think that's fine. The equality that we should hope for, to strive for, is equality of opportunity and not necessarily equality of outcomes. But I will say, too, that to achieve equality of opportunity, it's probably helpful to have a critical mass of women in the field, to be a substantial minority rather than a tiny group. I have to say, looking back on my career, it's sometimes been kind of difficult and discouraging in faculty meetings and seminars and conferences to feel like a woman who just wandered inadvertently into the men's locker room. So in economics, as in other fields, a second revolution in the last 40 years is the way computers have changed the way we carry out our work. So most of you graduating today grew up with a personal computer and email and the internet, and it's probably hard for you to imagine what life was like without them. So I'm going to describe just how they've affected economics in particular. So in economics, as in other fields, there's both a theoretical side and an empirical side, and computers have changed very dramatically the way both parts of the field do their work. So economic theorists write down mathematical systems of equations that we hope describe some economic phenomenon. So trade between Canada and the US, the labor market in Toronto, and so on. So when I was a graduate student, the only way to study such models was with pencil and paper, and to analyze the mathematical system that way. And so for that to be feasible, the models had to be extremely simple. You could have just, maybe one or two features, one or two time periods, even if you were interested in studying long-run dynamics, and so on. So it was very limited what you could put into those models. Today we have the luxury of writing down models that are far too complicated to study by hand, and instead we can simulate them on the computer. So in a broad sense, these models are similar to the ones used by meteorologists to study weather patterns, or by aeronautical engineers to study new airplane designs, and so on. And many other fields have enjoyed the same benefits that economics has. Now, models of this sort have their failures as well as their successes, but I would say that the ability to study them has been an incredibly powerful tool. I mean, economists don't have the luxury of running experiments on real economies. So simulating economies in these computer models is the best substitute that we have. On the empirical side, the digital revolution has probably changed life even more dramatically. So for one thing, it's just made data sets much more accessible. So when I was a graduate student, doing an empirical project often meant acquiring a tape. And a tape came in a big metal can. It looks like, like you see those old cans that film for movies used to come in, those big canisters. So that's the way data came, on the same kind of tape. You had to take it to the computer center to be mounted, and then it was available to use for a few days. Then it was unmounted to make room for somebody else's tape, and that was it. Your chance was over, and it was hard. So today, a lot of data can be collected. You just go to your PC, you can download it off the net, and there it is on your own desktop anytime you want it, 24/7 for as many days or weeks or months as you want to have access to it. But a second change that computers have had, I would say, and this is perhaps even more important, is it's changed by several orders of magnitude the size of the data sets that can be studied. And the ability to look at these large data sets in turn has meant that the data actually gets collected and assembled. So economists now routinely examine census data for the US, They scrape Google's archives to look at word counts in newspaper articles, or they look at Amazon or eBay records to look at commercial transactions. A few European countries has such complete social security record that you can track over several decades every person's labor market history in that country. Every time they changed employers, every time they changed a job description with the same employer, every time they had a spell of unemployment. So in 1972, a data set with that kind of detail was simply unimaginable. And these data sets have millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of observations. And it's just, it is several orders of magnitude bigger than what was possible then. So there's still a lot that economists don't know, but the ability to study these complex models and access to these larger and richer data sources is letting us push out the frontiers in ways that would have been impossible without the digital revolution. So in 1972, the increase in opportunities for women and the rise of the digital age were starting, but no one could foresee in any detail how those revolutions would play out. Now, for you sitting here today, just be aware that the next 40 years will surely bring equally great changes, which you have no inkling of now. So let me say to you, as you finish this phase of your life and begin the next, just keep in mind that the world continues to change, and often very quickly. You're the ones that can and will and should change it further, but you may not realize how big these changes are until you're 40 years from now, when you're looking back on your own life over those 40 years. Thank you.